My research is in the area of road safety, specifically using GNSS data, or here in North America, we would call that GPS data usually. And so today I'll be looking at how this data can be used in a smart cities framework, and specifically talk a bit about my current research in the area of insurance telematics as well. So just before I begin, of course, it's already been mentioned, but my supervisor is Orly Lab at HEC. We as well have worked with collaborators at Polytechnique, McGill, and Intact Insurance as well. So the good news for people working in road safety is that the situation is constantly improving, especially over recent years. We can see that the number of crashes and injuries and fatalities is going down consistently, which is great news. Unfortunately, there are still large economic and social costs associated with crashes. So the stat here is in 2016, almost 1,900 people passed away as a result of road traffic crashes. And really the first step in this road safety management is measuring risk somehow. And so typically, as can be seen in this figure, for example, we use historical crash data to measure risk. So for example, just the number of crashes per billion vehicle kilometers, things like that. And although this is a popular technique, there are several issues with it. The main ones I've highlighted here. So first of all, that crashes are underreported, especially very minor crashes that are not reported to police or to insurance companies for that matter. So we're missing this portion of the data. As well, we require really long collection periods. So again, going back to the first thing I said, thankfully crashes are going down and they're relatively rare. Unfortunately, this means to collect enough information, we need to wait a long time. And perhaps the most important point here is that crash data is reactive. So we don't know that a section of road is dangerous until we've experienced several crashes there. So obviously this is a bit of an issue for people who are trying to reduce crashes. So in response to this, we've seen some cities adopt data-driven approaches to work more proactively to manage road safety. And this field in general is called surrogate safety. And so here we're looking at any measures that aren't crashes that can be used to measure risk. So this field's been around for a long time, actually, since the 1960s, where people were manually observing traffic. But more recently, you may be more familiar with this very popular technique of using cameras and computer vision to track road users as they move through the video frame. One problem with that is that we can't install cameras everywhere in the road network, obviously. And so we've started to see some more work on mobile sensors. So this is kind of a fundamental shift in data collection, where rather than installing sensors on the roadside, we're actually installing the sensors in the vehicles themselves. You might hear these vehicles sometimes referred to as probe vehicles. The idea here is just that we get some sort of continuous and precise data from vehicles that are actually operating within the traffic. And primarily, we've seen this data collected in two ways, either using the vehicle's onboard diagnostic system, or more recently with smartphone devices. So next, I just wanted to talk about, like, well, why does this research matter? What is the motivation for doing this? So there are actually two different sides to this. So from the perspective of the public sector, cities are looking for new tools, like I said, to manage road safety. The first step in this process is something called network screening, where we want to look at the entire road network and try to identify which are the most dangerous sites. So we need some relatively low cost way to consider the whole road network. So again, typically this has been done using just crash data. Cities have access to all of the police reported crashes in their jurisdiction, and we can develop some regression models based on that data to give us an idea of where the dangerous sites are. But as I've said, crash data has a lot of issues, which some GNSS approaches would help us to solve. However, there have been very few examples of using this data in network screening. This is primarily because of two limitations. So first of all, data is costly to collect and transmit and store, although this has been largely overcome with advances in technology. Secondly, a lot of work has required the use of dedicated probe vehicles. So we actually need to instrument some vehicles and hire some drivers to go and drive around the city. So obviously, most of the studies in this area have been limited to, say, less than 10 drivers. And what I think is super interesting in this area is that this limitation can be overcome by incentivizing consumers. So that brings us to the second motivation, which is for the private sector. And so during my postdoc at HSA, I've been working with Intact Insurance and their car insurance group. Conventionally, premiums for car insurance would be calculated based on what are called rating variables. So a client's age, where they live, information about their vehicle. Based on this, clients with similar characteristics driving similar vehicles will always pay a similar price. So recently we've seen a surge in usage-based insurance programs. You might have also heard this referred to as pay as you drive or pay how you drive. In these programs where the insurance provider is capturing driving data using GPS in order to capture some information about that driver's behavior, right? So are there behaviors that we can capture that would make someone more or less likely to file a claim? And the way that we obtain this data from drivers is that we offer them a monthly discount. So if you participate in this program, it's likely that you'll save on your insurance premium every month. And typically these programs have only considered driver level safety measures. So you can see them here at the bottom. So these would be examples of surrogate safety measures. So we look at distracted driving, whether people are using their phones, hard braking and hard acceleration, speeding, and driving overnight. But we should recognize that traffic crashes and therefore insurance claims are related to both characteristics of the driver and the road on which people are driving. So by including some information, not only about the driver, but about the road network, this could help to improve the discount calibration, save people more money, which would be a competitive advantage for the insurance provider so that they could then make more money. And so hopefully it's clear to see that research in this area is useful both from a smart cities perspective, but also directly beneficial to insurers. So the purpose of my research is first to quantify relationships between surrogate safety measures and historical crash frequency, and then to develop some models that we can use to estimate the risk across the entire road network. Okay, and there are three main objectives. So the first is to validate that there are statistical relationships between these measures and crash frequency. The second is then to develop the model. And the third is to look at different sources of data and look across cities, see if we can get consistent results. So I won't go too far into technical detail. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have after or by email or anything like that. But in the work that I've done so far, we have four main data sets. So we have one smartphone data set, which was collected in Quebec City. And then we have three data sets coming from the onboard diagnostic system of insurance clients. So these were provided by Intact for Quebec City, Montreal, and Ottawa. And the first thing, or really the one thing I want to point out on this slide is if you can see here for my first study, which used this data from Montrachet. At the time, this was considered a really large sample size, about 22,000 trips. And granted, the Intact data is over a longer period, but you can see we have about 10 times the sample size for the same city. So this represents a huge leap forward in the sample size that we're able to collect. So we've looked at four different surrogate safety measures. We have a measure of congestion, of average travel speed, measure of variation in speed, which we're measuring using the coefficient of variation. We also count the number of hard braking events. So we capture this information for each segment in the road network, which we call a link. And we also count the number of crashes experienced over a certain period of time in the past. Okay, and when we correlate those together, we get the results that I'm showing here. So what we're able to tell is that there are statistically significant relationships here. And then we also get information about the direction of the effect. So congestion, variation in speed, and hard braking is positively associated with crashes, while speed is negatively associated. Once we have this information, we can move on to a model. So again, I'm going to skim over the details here, but we're using a latent Gaussian model. And we also incorporate spatial effects. So basically, when we're considering one segment in the road network, we know that that its number of crashes should be correlated to the links that are immediately adjacent to that. And we're also using a technique to speed up the process of estimating these models, which is called INLA. The main observations that we've seen so far based on these results is that the measures that we're considering are largely significant. And the correlations that we're getting from our estimated results compared to the historical crash data are moderately strong. And importantly, the model is consistent between cities. So for a company like Intact, this means that they could use this type of analysis and roll it out quickly across all of North America. Okay, and then finally, just some conclusions. So as I said at the beginning, we really have these two perspectives. And what our research has shown is that this type of work would be beneficial to both the public and the private sector. So it would allow cities to move to a more proactive method for road safety management. And it also provides a benefit to insurance providers looking to improve their discount calibration. And that is all for me. So thank you very much.